I just turn up with charisma, and that's all I've got.
Podcasts are about just turning up and talking. Hi everybody, welcome back to Lilu Talks, where we explore the transformative power of digital innovation, delve into the nuances of tech leadership through a female lens, emotions and technology, people and inclusivity, and more. We are your hosts, Lisa and Lucy, and today's topic revolves around the performance anxiety and imposter syndrome at work, with our special guests, Doina Grubii, a recruitment consultant at VMA. So Doina, who is originally from Eastern Europe, brings a wealth of experience from her dynamic career journeys. And in her current role as a recruitment consultant with one of my favorite recruitment firms, VMA Group, she is working on placing the right candidates for different roles at the companies she works with. Hi, Doina. Welcome.
So much for having me, ladies. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast. It's actually my first podcast experience. So, celebratory clap. And I'm sure it's going to be amazing. So thank you so much for the intro. It's currently working as a recruitment consultant. I've been doing this for the last, almost 3 years. Prior to that, I was in marketing, working for various tech companies, mostly American, huge organizations, highly matrixed. So I came across all kinds of individuals spanning from the Middle East, South Africa, Israel to community independent states. Lovely people. I've come across all kinds of cultures, backgrounds. I always try to find something or to remember something about each individual country that these people are from, because I feel that's the best way to get a faster connection to them, I feel. I was talking the other day with a candidate that was from Turkey, and I remembered a couple of words in Turkish. And at the end of our conversation, I just said thank you in Turkish, and her face lit up. And then I'm sure, she left with a nice memory of our interaction. So yeah. Thanks for having me.
Our topic today is performance anxiety and boom, imposter syndrome. I know you guys heard about this probably many times. According to a KPMG study, 75% of women executives experience imposter syndrome in the workplace. And based on an article of Factorial HR, 87% of employees deal with performance anxiety at work. You probably think, why does the imposter syndrome only talk about women? Because when I was doing my research, LinkedIn article said that women tend to suffer more from the imposter syndrome than men. And this is because women face more obstacles, biases, societal expectations, and discriminations as compared to men. And I'm not saying men don't have pressures and societal biases. We all know that men usually are known to always being strong. They're not allowed to talk about their emotions. And I've worked with companies where they actually embrace that men talk about their emotions, which I love.
I think so often imposter syndrome is presented as a problem that women experience. I think it's a human thing. I think it's a thing that humans experience. Men, women, people that identify as men, people that identify as women. I would love it if we could just talk about this from a human angle. Right. Now, Lisa, I know you did a poll and you had some really interesting results. So I would just ask anyone listening to this podcast, if you are male or female or non-binary, maybe you want to tell us about your experiences of imposter syndrome. In the comments, let us know, whether you think this is something mostly experienced by women or you think it's something that's prevalent for everyone. I personally, my opinion, I'm just going to come right out with it, is that I think it's everyone. I think there are so few people that don't experience this. I think it's a human experience, right? We know there's a slight difference between imposter syndrome, as a definition, and just normal self-doubt, or, what can sometimes be helpful self-doubt. So earlier I used the example of, maybe you're given a stretch task at work, or you're being brought into a project that's an entirely new area for you. I think it's a completely normal reaction to experience a little bit of self-doubt, or am I going to be able to handle this? This is brand new to me. I've got a lot to learn here. Is this stretch task a stretch too far? I think that's that's normal self-doubt. That's not imposter syndrome.
The definition of both of these terms that we've been throwing out as if they are Oprah gifts. The definition of performance anxiety is a type of anxiety or strong, excessive feeling of fear or worry that is related to being able to accomplish something specific. It can also be related to a fear of consequences of not being able to perform well. Signs may include nervousness, sweating, racing heartbeat, trembling, difficulty concentrating, brain fog, all these different things. Whereas imposter syndrome, by the National Institute of Health, considered as a behavioral health phenomenon, described as self-doubt of intellect, skills, or accomplishment among high-achieving individuals. So there's, of course, differences and there's overlap. Performance anxiety primarily focuses on the fear of not meeting expectations or failing to perform up to a certain standard. It's more about the fear of specific tasks or situations. And imposter syndrome centers around the persistent belief that one's accomplishments are undeserved and that they will eventually be exposed as fraud. The overlap here is that both performance anxiety and imposter syndrome can coexist and reinforce each other. For example, the fear of failure with performance anxiety, feelings of being an imposter, while imposter syndrome can heighten anxiety about performance, etc. Go ahead and do your own research to understand the definitions. There's plenty of amazing YouTube videos out there who also give other examples. We will also explain some of our personal experiences. Maybe you guys can relate to them.
Yeah, because we're not experts, right? Doina, I think that, that kind of performance anxiety that Lisa was talking about there and the imposter syndrome maybe is something that you see quite often because you spend a lot of time talking to candidates. So interested in your experiences here.
Well, by no means am I an expert because I think that would be a psychologist more than a recruiter. I am sort of not a therapist, but let's just say a confident, right? Confident about, because people trust me with their professional lives. They come to me to talk about personal issues that affect their professional choices, meaning, families mixed families, people wanting to relocate, things like that, different aspects of a person's life that we would not necessarily think about when speaking about recruitment. But yes, to answer your question, I think there are a lot of things that can impact your state of mind when it comes to your career, and not being from a specific country, trying to prove yourself in that specific country is one of those things. And actually, one of my lovely colleagues that I work with, her name is Anna Newsom. She is a recruitment consultant in our internal comms team. She created a network called the Non-Native Communicators Network. And at least once a month, she'll invite non-native English-speaking people that work in internal comms for roundtable events, or sort of created a space for them where they can share their experiences. And I think this is something that the three of us also kind of wanted to touch upon, like what would be a medium, what is something that can help performance anxiety and the imposter syndrome. And I really wanted to speak about that because I've attended a considerable number of those events, and I think it's great. People come, they share their stories, it's a safe environment, and people realize that they're not alone.
So I have a question for the both of you. What are some potential causes or triggers of performance anxiety or imposter syndrome for you? Like, what is your experience with that? Have you ever faced this imposter syndrome or performance anxiety, and what were your triggers? Where did it happen? Do you think it stems from something from, I don't know, your childhood or going through school, having certain teachers?
I was thinking, for me, every time I get a thought like that or a feeling that I try to turn it around, to make it my USP, right? My unique selling point. This is who I am. It's my uniqueness that makes me who I am. So I try to turn it into something positive. As soon as I feel it creep up, I'm like, no, I'm not going to let this one rear its ugly head. So that's kind of my approach, and what has helped me so far to not let it get the better of me.
I remember you mentioned something yesterday in our call. That was, I believe it was your teacher mentioned about the performance anxiety, what you can do with that. I found that so interesting.
Yeah, so I was telling Lisa yesterday that I used to study, I was in musical school. I used to study violin and piano. And I, at least quarterly, I would have to perform in front of a group of people as part of the exam sessions that we used to have. And my violin teacher told me something. She goes, never make any grimaces when you're on the stage, because obviously you're very nervous. People don't pay attention most of the time, but if they look at you at that exact moment and they'll see your face, they'll know you made a mistake. So just, focus on your poker face, do your thing, and everything's going to be okay.
You know what? That's such good advice. So I also come from a performance background. My mum is a dancing teacher. So I grew up doing dancing and so many shows. We have another whole podcast episode of some of the awful costumes I've had to wear, right? But one of the things people used to say often, I would come off stage having got something wrong, or somebody else in the group had got something wrong, and we'd be, frustrated and go, oh, I can't believe we got that wrong. Every single time, without exception, people would say, oh, I thought that's how it was supposed to go. I even remember a situation where I had gone in exactly the wrong direction to the entire rest of the group, and I'd come off stage and said, did you guys see that when I got it wrong? And they all said, oh, we thought that's what was supposed to happen. They don't know. So you're absolutely right, Doina, that you shouldn't, you shouldn't display any kind of, facial cues or verbal cues in the moment, because 100% of the time people would tell me that's what they thought was supposed to happen, and they don't know. And as you say, and the ones that do know, they're probably not paying attention. So the proportion of people that actually notice or recognize that you've either got something wrong or perhaps you're not up to scratch in a particular space is so small. And it's so big to us because we're so focused on what we're doing, but actually to other people it's tiny and mostly unnoticeable. So that's excellent advice, and I really like that.
I would kind of like to know a little bit about some of your personal anecdotes or experiences with your colleagues or people around you. And since Lucy, you said earlier about men, it would be great to hear, have you heard any stories at work or with the male counterparts around you when it comes to performance anxiety?
It's not necessarily around me, but I just heard the story on a podcast, and you will know exactly who I'm talking about because we've all seen this movie. So there's this, you guys remember Dumb and Dumber?
Yes.
Of course. So if you recall that scene when they get stopped by a police officer on the highway and they've been drinking beer, and you know what happens next, right? You remember he drinks the beer, which is not beer, because he sees the open containers in the car. It's a really funny scene. I think we should all rewatch that movie. Essentially, this is the guy. His name is Harland Williams. He's I would say quite a famous comedian / actor. He was invited on a podcast, and he was asked about that scene, and he actually shared that was his first movie ever. And Jeff Daniels and Jim Carrey had been nominated for Oscars and, very famous people. And he was just at the beginning of his road in this particular area of, art, acting, right? And the hosts were asking him, so what did you do? Because obviously you are very intimidated. These are super famous people, and you're trying to compete with them. And I will read this out loud because I took the quote of what he said. I loved it. He goes, I thought to myself, this is your destiny. This is where life's led you. Take it on the horse and ride it. You are not here by accident. You are here to do a job. Take this moment in and seize it. And I love that so much because he even shared his personal anecdote. I guess they did it 4 times or something, and he actually made Jeff Daniels and Jim Carrey laugh, and that was the one of the best moments in his life. So yeah.
That's great. I love that. And so I have, you just reminded me of my favorite imposter syndrome is bullshit story, which is, now I think I heard this on a podcast as well, and I believe it to be Sir Ian McKellen. It's either Sir Ian McKellen or Patrick Stewart. So Gandalf, don't come for me if I've got it wrong. So let's say it was Ian McKellen. So he was at a fancy event, and it was, you know, a charity event. It was honouring people that had done really good charity work, really notable work. And he said he felt really small and he felt really insignificant. He just had no idea why he was there. He was, kind of slunk to the back of the room, found the bar and, ordered a drink, standing there thinking, all these people here, doing these incredible works, and I really don't feel like I belong. And he looked to his right and there was a guy doing the same thing who leaned over to Ian McKellen and said, can you even believe that I'm here? Like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. Like, look at all these people. They're amazing. What am I doing here? And Ian McKellen said, well, Mr. Armstrong, you did walk on the moon. So right then I just thought, you know what? If Neil Armstrong feels imposter syndrome, I have no right feeling it. So
really good.
You kind of were the first man on the moon. I mean,
yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So right then I just thought, that's it. I'm done with imposter syndrome, because if Neil Armstrong has it, then I have no hope. I'm just not even going to go there anymore. It's total bullshit. And that's it. Finished.
Oh my God. Thank you for sharing. I love to always hear that, especially from people who are in such high positions, right? I mean, we sometimes forget. We always think like people who are so well known and high up have their SHIT together, but they don't. It's similar to like a lot of people like younger than us or generations below us always saying, oh, once you hit 30, you should have your life together. I barely know what I have for breakfast sometimes. How am I supposed to?
I had no breakfast today, so there's that.
There's that, yes. I know for sure I will have coffee and I'll wake up.
Yeah.
I'm still deciding what I want to be when I grow up.
Exactly. So we sometimes forget that. We forget that people have these like performance anxieties, all these actors and actresses, which is actually a great example because these people are always on stage. I can actually talk about a story for myself because I don't have actor story like you guys do at the moment. But I remember clearly because I am the prime example of performance anxiety, and I know exactly where this comes from because I've been doing some soul searching and self-reflecting and working on myself. Simply because I do want to become a performance speaker in the future or now, right? It was one of the best examples I could tell you is when I was doing my driver's license school and exam in Germany. And not sure if many of you guys know, but in Germany, it's really, really difficult to get your driver's license. All means it should be. You know how fast people drive in Germany. So I would not want to have anyone who's not properly trained on the Autobahn without having proper training. Anyways, I love driving. My father taught me since I was young. Not that I was driving on the public road. I'm talking about showing me how to shift as a car was standing in our driveway, or just teaching me some things about cars. And then my teacher said, you're a great driver. He doesn't usually come across, he doesn't say that often because they say you should have 16 hours of practical and theoretical. And I've done everything and in the theory and studying very well. And he says, well, you can go ahead and do your driving test. I think you're good at 16 hours. You don't need to do more, as he would usually recommend with most people. And I was like, yay, nice, I'm doing well. And so anyways, I go to the driving test. So the theoretical one I passed, which was fine. I could have probably had 100 out of something, and I think I had like 1 or 2 questions that I've missed. I don't remember. It's been a long time. I'm older now, but I definitely remember the driving part, and I was confident. I actually already remember me getting nervous, and I sit down in the car, and I was like, okay, I can do it. As soon as the driver sat into the car and closed the door, I was like, what is my name, what year it is, and where are we? And I was like, I completely started getting very nervous. My hands were wet from sweating, but I started to drive, and literally it took 2-3 minutes and the driver says, go back. And I just completely blacked out. I forgot to put the blinker on, And long story short, my parents realized that I've had this even when I was a kid, like even in school, because my teacher said she's very brilliant, but she tends to get nervous during exams. I never failed. I was always doing well in school, but I think I remember the day that actually triggered it. I was going to school a year ahead of most other kids. And I had a professor in school that, and this is where again comes where sometimes these imposter syndromes and performance anxiety come from childhood, right? And the teacher said, oh, she had a C in math, and that was the only C I had in third grade. I was always scared of math for some reason. And by the way, I love math now. And because of that, you should have your kid, because of that one C, repeat the entire year. So I've remembered, and it started to become much, much worse. And I also grew up with very, very strict parents, so let's not forget about that. I was raised very, very strict, and you, Doina, probably know from having Eastern European parents, and I cannot say, but I just know from experience, Eastern European and Middle Eastern parents are quite similar. You grow up with always having to be perfect, never failing and stuff like that, and then they taught me to like hypnotherapist.
Yeah.
And I did hypnotherapy, and then I passed the second time. So sometimes it's so difficult, particularly in interviews. I've been interviewing as well, where I've had moments where I was like, Lisa, what the heck did you just say? Did you just forget what you have 8 to 9 years of experience? Like, did you forget all that? And it does happen. And then I'm sure I'm not the only one, especially with this current job market where, Doina, I'm sure you can, tell us a little bit about the candidates you work with.
Yeah, I remember the story about a close friend of mine, and she had a similar situation to what you're describing. She was she was in university, was just ahead of her exam, was at the exam, and I had a complete blackout, started crying, couldn't stop. And we were classmates, and I've known her since we were 12 years old, so pretty much all of our lives. And I remember how mistreated she was in school by some teachers. Very similar story to you, because she's a very bright girl, but there is no one formula to fit all, right? And with her in particular, I feel the approach should have been completely different, because she was very talented in many regards. But that's the problem. I think in our school system, they kind of have especially in Eastern Europe. I don't know about the school system in the UK, so I can't make any comments on that. But in Eastern Europe, it's just one formula to fit all. You're not encouraged to think outside the box. You're not encouraged to challenge the status quo. Whatever is said to you, you're just supposed to take it as, a given. That's the ultimate truth, and that's that. And it just should not be like that. That's my personal opinion. Going back to your question about candidates and performance anxiety, I mean, it happens every day. It depends on the personality of the person. Some people are more willing to share these sorts of more intimate thoughts. Some people are a bit more reluctant. It's about, finding that the way to reach and get that from them. But again, that will not happen always. It's on a case-by-case basis, and you usually, as you said, you're at the beginning of the podcast. I think it's a sort of a, or I said, confidence type of, you tell me whatever you can, whatever you want. I will never push for anything, whatever you're able to share, because then I can help you, right? But if you don't give me that information, then I can't. So that's kind of how I see it, essentially, from a recruitment perspective as well.
So we all remember, teachers, right? Because teachers have such a huge impact on us. And in that sort of teaching, coaching vein, Doina, do you coach any candidates when you're putting them forward for roles?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll talk to them about, the organization. I'll talk to them about what is expected, a sort of, again, bits and tricks, I guess, that they can focus on. Obviously look at the job spec and see what is expected from you. And I would say normally focus on having like a list of examples, because time just flies and you need to have things written down so you can have a look, and then, okay, you know what to speak about, focus on key things. I have clients that do half-hour interviews. That is not sufficient. Like, you don't even have the time to say pleasantries. So you must be prepared always. That would be my key advice to candidates.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And preparation is so important. I think you can over prepare, but there's a sweet spot, right? There's a balance in the middle there.
Absolutely.
For being prepared enough. I do some coaching and mentoring of the early careers employees at Fidelity, and one of the things that when we talk about interviews and things like that as they're preparing to move on with their career, one of the pieces of advice that I always give them is to always have a couple of questions written down with you when you go into an interview, because the last thing any interviewer is going to ask you is, have you got any questions for me? And I think most people say no, but I think it just shows that next level of engagement to say, actually, yeah, I've got some questions here. I want to ask you about them. So sometimes it can be something general about the company. Sometimes it can be something about the team or about the role. But I think always have I would suggest having three. Doina, I don't know how you feel about that number. Sometimes they're going to answer one of those questions without you getting to ask it. So you don't want to have your only question be on a piece of paper and then have them answer it within 3 minutes. And then you're like, damn it, now I've got to think of another question. I've even had a situation where I was interviewed and I said, they said, have you got any questions? And I said, oh, you know what? I had three, but you've actually answered them all. And they said, oh, really? What were your questions? Let me see. Let's make sure we answered those. And I felt like they didn't really believe that I actually had questions, but luckily I had them written down. So I just had my piece of paper and handed it over and said, yeah, you answered those too, like right off the bat, the minute we walked in. So, but at least it showed that I was prepared and that I was interested, that I'd, to your point, Donna, that I'd prepared and thought about the role and what I was going to bring, and were there any grey areas maybe I wanted some clarification on, and that I was interested in the company. So yeah, that's one kind of tip that I give to. Then even if you've had a terrible interview, you can round it off well and walk away feeling like, okay, well, maybe I rescued it there at the end.
No, but I definitely, to answer your question, I think 3 is a good number, definitely. 5 would be too many.
Yeah.
But 3 is...
You can always follow up, right? You can always follow
absolutely.
up, worst case. Now let's talk about when you're hired. And that is a question of what can managers, for example, do, to make sure that, employees don't have imposter syndrome or performance anxiety. And I've read somewhere that a lot of times burnout actually comes from imposter syndrome and performance anxiety or never feeling good enough. And a lot of time when people do meaningful work and also get the validation for it, so the managers say you did a good job or thank you for that, so this is great, instead of just like, oh, thanks, and just being quiet about it. Because you stop overthinking things. Oh, have I done this well? Because I've seen myself in this. I was in this position before, where I have constantly thought, oh my God, am I doing well? I've literally had moments where I went to the bathroom and cried because I felt like I wasn't doing enough or I wasn't doing well enough until I think 2 weeks later. One of my colleagues literally gave me a shout out and says, thank you so much because your work is amazing. You've been very supportive. Something really, really great. It's validating that what I was doing was okay. And even my manager said, you're doing great. See, you've been so quick, getting up to speed within the first 2 weeks already. And because I always feel like I want to always do well. So what can managers do to support or to be there for their employees or for their coworkers to make sure that they don't have that, they don't get burned out?
That's a great question. What can managers do? I think there are multiple things to be done, but the main thing is for the employee to actually want that help. Because I think, again, if we're talking about somebody that's a bit more introverted, there could be cases where it's hard for them to speak out and say that they have an issue, right? So I think probably one way of doing it is just having, those anonymous surveys with questions that what things can be improved, and probably offer some support with, now most of us have private healthcare with a therapist available, somebody to speak to. It doesn't have to be. I think therapy also has its stigma around it, right? Because it's wow, such a strong word, but truthfully, it's also it's a friend that you're talking to. That's how I would see it. And I think if more companies, more managers would just offer anonymous help like that, the service of somebody to come and speak to their employees, that would be really, really helpful.
Oh, I love that suggestion. I particularly like the point that you were making about it not being always easy to speak out or even identify that you need help some of the time. So just sort of springboarding off your point there, if you have people that are neurodiverse, they might not be comfortable asking for help or even particularly aware that they're needing that kind of help. So to couple with your suggestion there, I think the best thing that managers can do is really, really focus on inclusion of all kinds. We know that this is an issue with a huge amount of intersectionality behind it, imposter syndrome. And obviously, we're not really diving into any of those areas of intersectionality, but we know they exist. We're just able to speak from our own experience. So I think the more that a manager fosters a feeling of inclusion, the less anxiety and second guessing and worrying, is this enough? Am I doing enough? Am I performing? Am I a fraud? Am I going to be found out? The more inclusive the environment is, the less those feelings will surface. So I think inclusion is probably for me the real keystone element here.
Absolutely.
Definitely. I mean, there's a lot of brilliant people out there. I've met brilliant minds who are shy, and I seem to somehow always motivate. I've had friends of mine write me letters to say thank you for bringing, making me more confident and allowing me to be myself and speak up a little bit more and really help me. And then they don't realize I overthink sometimes, or if it's something that I really am passionate about, I can come up a little bit more versus when I try to be more nonchalant. But whenever you tell yourself, and it's a practicing. I was talking to Atul, you guys remember him from a previous podcast, and he said to me, and then also another friend of mine who is the head of talent at Apple, he said to me, just keep practicing, put yourself into expose yourself. And it's something called the tube girl effect, I would call it actually, where people were on the social media commenting and saying even anxiety is afraid of her, because even social anxiety is afraid of that, of the tube girl, because she was so confident. Imagine but if I go onto a tube and put my phone and put a selfie, even that for me gives me social anxiety sometimes. But these situations, expose yourself, because that can actually help you to really, first of all, trigger this anxiety and work on it, just like therapists do, right? You need to trigger these situations a lot of times and practice. Mm-hmm. Basically, put yourself out there naked, not literally. Please do not go naked in public, guys.
There we go. You all heard it. Lisa's telling everyone to get naked.
No, I know.
That's going in the edit.
Do not come for me, guys. I disclaimer. It was not literally, it was figuratively. Put yourself out.
Nobody heard that. Edit point. There's a really great social scientist called Amy Cuddy. I highly recommend that you check out her work. She talks about power posing and how to increase your kind of social capital. But she has a saying that I really like, which is not fake it till you make it, but fake it until you become it, which I think is what you're trying to say there, Lisa.
I said I love that. Fake it. Become it. That's a really good one.
Absolutely. I grew up in an era where, and even still now, where they say, if you go into an interview, show them how much you want it. And of course, I'm not going to apply for a job if I don't want it, right? I've had opportunities before that I actually turned down, which I now regret, of course. But again, I like to pick a role that I really like, and I want to be in it as long as I can, whether it's contract role or permanent role. So I've always picked things that I like. So this for me is the difficulty to then sometimes be nonchalant about it. But again, practice, as you said.
And also, I think everything happens for a reason. Life, and I know it's the biggest, corniest thing to say, but I've lived through it so many times where I wanted a job so badly, but then in the end, life took me completely on a different path. And, here I am in London. I never thought I would work in recruitment in London, but I'm loving it and embracing it. And that's what if I'm to give any advices, this would be it. Just embrace life and let it surprise you, because it's one of the most amazing things you'll ever experience.
Absolutely.
What a great place to leave it.
Absolutely. Any last words?
Well, finally, my friend Dave, everyone should have one. My friend Dave says there's no such thing as a bad decision. So Lisa, you were saying you had made decisions you regretted. Dave says there's no such thing as a bad decision because you made the decision that was right for you in the moment. Therefore, there are no such things as bad decisions. There you go. You are absolved.
Thank you so much.
Words of wisdom to finish from Dave.
Thank you, Dave. Even though you're not our guest, but appreciate it, Dave. Comment below, and please validate what she said. We want to make sure that it is factual information. With that said, thank you so much, Doina, for joining us. And I'm honest.
Thank you for having me.
Every time I pronounce someone's name, I always wonder, am I saying this right? And I speak 3 languages. I come from multicultural backgrounds, and yet I still have issues sometimes pronouncing someone's name. So if I mispronounce your name,
honestly, don't worry. You're close enough. It's Doina, but you did
Doina.
Thank you so much.
I have no excuses. I only speak English and bad English.
No, it's English and sarcasm.
Yeah.
Or as Americans always say, I speak a 4th language. You're right, sarcasm. Anyway, thank you so much.
I usually say I'm like Bruce Willis. I only speak English and bad English.
Oh God.